The season of Lent officially ends on Easter Sunday. Since Lent was 6 weeks long, I've decided to tell 6 Easter jokes for kids and those of us who are still kids at heart. Number 1, why do we paint Easter eggs? Because it's easier than trying to wallpaper them. I didn't say these were good jokes. What kind of bunny can't hop? A chocolate one. Why do Easter eggs hide? Because they're a little chicken. What do you call a rabbit with fleas? Bugs Bunny. And what do you get if you pour boiling water down a rabbit hole? A hot cross bunny. And the last one is actually for some older folks. What do you call 10 rabbits marching backwards? A receding hairline. Ian's the only one who didn't laugh. Why would a pastor start an Easter sermon off with jokes? Well, you can ask all around. I start almost every sermon with humor. You see, I agree with the Jewish mystic Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, who I once heard claim that religion without humor is blasphemy. Humor is a gift, and it's a blessing from God. And I am convinced that humor is not only a huge part of our Bible, but is there and out in the world as a means by which we can mediate the divine, help us enter into sacred space. Humor can be a holy tool. And with that in mind, not only do I often put humor in sermons, but today I want to point out that actually the Easter stories in the Bible can be heard to have a layer of intentional humor to them. We don't tend to hear it, but if we listen anew, which I'm inviting you to do today, we can hear it there. For instance, in the Gospel of John's famous Easter story, the very first apostle, Mary, shows up outside the tomb, and as Jesus talks to her, she mistakes her dear friend and rabbi, the Christ, the Lord of all creation, for a lowly gardener. That's supposed to be heard as a bit funny. At the same time, signaling Christ's presence in others, in strangers. Similarly, in the Gospel of Luke, on Easter 2, unsuspecting disciples unknowingly chit-chat with Jesus as they stroll along with him down the road to Emmaus. And even as they sit and begin to eat with him. And then, when he breaks bread, they recognize him. Christ is surprising people at Easter, popping up unrecognized. And then voila! Christ can be recognized in others. And there's a different sort of Easter humor in the Gospel of Matthew. An earthquake occurs, and a glowing angel descends from the sky and rolls back the tombstone in such a terrifying way that the macho, heavenly armed Roman guards around the tomb are petrified with fear. And amidst this fearful event, the angel looks at the women disciples witnessing it all and says, "Don't be afraid." A funny request, given that the Roman guards' knees are still shaking. And in today's lectionary reading for Easter, we can find some humor too. 3 women show up early in the morning to tend to the already entombed body of Jesus. And as they approach the tomb, it almost comically dawns on them at the last minute that there's a big old stone that they have to move from the tomb. And so we hear them say to each other, "Who's going to roll the stone away?" And then lo and behold, it's already moved. And when they go inside the tomb, Jesus isn't there. Instead, there's some young chap there who startles them further with news that not only is Jesus not there, but that he's raised from the dead. And the women react like, I'm pretty sure most of us would. We're told that they're overcome with terror and dread, and they fled that tomb and said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. The resurrected Jesus, though, is not to be feared. Mark's community knew this, but could look back and understand the disciples' mistaken fear and their fleeing. It's only later that the truth of Easter resurrection is understood, and the early reaction can be smiled at with a knowing understanding. The Easter story is very, very strange if we think about it. The story is that Jesus, despite being executed on a Friday, has risen from the dead Easter morning. 3 days of death is ordinarily enough to hold anyone down. And that was the experience back then, and it's been the experience ever since. Except for the amazing Easter event that we and others around the world are celebrating this morning. Somehow, some way, there really was an Easter event. An event where Jesus, who was dead, is experienced as very much alive. To some as a physical reality, to others as a spiritual reality, to some as the image of Jesus, to some in the image of others, and in creation itself. The early writers of the story know that any way we consider this, it's hard to imagine. The early followers and authors of the Gospels know that this is difficult to believe. We can even hear in the stories that are told a bit of levity, a sort of self-effacing acknowledgement that the story belies ordinary experiences of death. Jesus is dead. So dead that people who knew him can't even register that they are in the presence of him. And why would they? He's dead. But no, he's not. There is, from a human perspective, a sort of cosmic joke angle to what's going on. I mean, it's just not normal. And so it's hard to fathom. Yet it happened. The ultimate bottom line to the story is an undeniable truth from a Christian perspective. Jesus lives on in one way or another. Christ is risen. And that cosmic joke may have caught the unsuspecting Jesus followers off guard, but the cosmic joke is not actually on them or on any of us. The joke is on Rome and on elite powers ever since that would try and stop God's way. That cosmic force, that unceasing call for us to love and to move toward caring and compassion and justice and peace. What we call the way, the path that Jesus taught and practiced and lived out more fully than anyone ever has. Jesus heard that call so loud and so strong that he dedicated his entire being to it. He emptied himself of quest for other things and pursued love with all the gifts and all the opportunities and all the moments that God provided. Jesus imagined a world where all hurdles the culture put up to love were knocked down. And then he lived as if they were knocked down. For us, Jesus was the first great teacher and practitioner of equality. The shunned became welcome, equals. Untouchable lepers became touchable, equals. Unforgivable, stonable, adulterous convicts became forgivable, livable, loving human beings, equals. Unworthy to the culture, children became worthy, equals. Hated tax collectors became beloved followers, equals. Demon-possessed became love-possessed, equals. Poor beggars became fed and nurtured, worthy human beings, equals. Strangers became friends, equals. Even enemies became those to love, equals. And a fantastic example of Jesus' efforts at knocking down all the hurdles and reimagining relationships as equal is his meal table. The common meal practice of his day was turned completely around by Jesus. His invitations were not, as tradition of the day dictated, to the elite and the connected. His untraditional invitations were to absolutely everyone. Everyone. And consequently, Jesus' table is remembered and recorded as having a menagerie of humankind, rich and poor, Gentile and Jew, slave and free, criminal and everyday Joes, men and women, able and disabled boys and girls, Pharisees, Syrophoenicians, Samaritans, Romans, soldiers, natives, aliens, friends, the loathed and foes, all were welcome to Jesus' table, and they still are. Jesus imagined the hurdles to human kindness and care were knocked down, and then he set out to live as if they really were, and not just at the table, of course, but in his followings and in his ministry and in his love and in the love of his followers. Not just some of the hurdles, all of them, all of them. Even 2,000 years later, that's still remarkable, still absolutely extraordinary. And in a little while, we're going to reenact that table with the Lord's Supper, which, like Jesus' original table, is at this church, also open to anyone, all the time, no hurdles to who may partake. And to some, this seems an unusual communion table practice because it's so open. But to us, it's the table practice Jesus started. And thanks to the Easter miracle, Jesus continues to this day to preside over this table. All are invited, all are welcome, all are loved, all matter much to him and to us. One of the extraordinary things about Jesus living to love and loving all who were and are living is that whether we think it was God's intentional or unintentional plan, one way or another, that living and loving created a way to God that has worked to connect millions of people to the sacred. It's a way that mediates the divine. It is a holy tool. The process theologian John Cobb refers to that continuing mediation effect by Jesus as the creation of a field of force that we can all step into or onto. It's what I like to think of as a portal, an opening to God. My Buddhist friend calls the Dharma gate. Metaphorically, there's a gate in life that we can step through and take a path to better experience God and dedicate our life to doing as Jesus did, to live, to love. And it's not an unattended opening, this portal, this gate. Easter ensured that it's got Jesus as a kind of all-in-one caretaker, teacher, role model, hero, greeter, guide, God presence, and walking the path beside us, companion. Jesus has an all-in-one existence. For Christians, he is the Christ being who greets and keeps us on the path to God, and our own transformative existence is what he leads us to. In fact, Jesus' role for us is so all-encompassing that we experience him as God incarnate, Christ. So that on the path, the way he left us, Jesus as Christ can be seen everywhere, soaking creation in sunsets and clouds and ocean waves, family, even in one another. We're going to sing a song in a few minutes that movingly remembers this beautiful truth. These experiences of Christ can occur in voices and images of Christ that speak to our heart, or for some of us, Jesus is actually taken in by our senses, mystical experiences of the very real resurrected person of Jesus. People, good, sane people, have joyfully reported experiencing such sensory encounters ever since that first Easter morning. From the gospel encounters I've already enumerated, to the Apostle Paul's blinding experience on the road, right up to some of our own post-Easter epiphanies with Jesus. He is really experienced as a living presence. For Christians, there's no other way to justly describe that reality. And some Christians understand Jesus' body as having been physically risen from the dead. And some Easter stories speak of Jesus in quite physical ways. But others report that he appeared in ways that transcend the physical. One way or another, the truth is that there has been an experiential reality of the beingness of Jesus for a period of over 2,000 years. And whether he comes to us as a spiritual presence like he did for Paul, or if he comes to us a physical presence like he did for Mary and the other disciples, there's a real, continuing, experiential nature to Jesus. If nothing else, all of us, even non-Christians, are affected by the real resonating presence and continuing effect his life has had throughout history right up to this morning. And I cannot emphasize enough how he, Jesus, as God incarnate, Christ, lives on. And not just in the beauty of the world and those on the path personas that we Christians turn to for help and comfort and personal transformation, the Christ who holds our hand, answers our prayers, and even appears to us personally. You see, we cannot forget that for Christians, Jesus the Christ also amazingly lives on and appears to us in other human beings as both givers and receivers of love and care and compassion. And once in that field of force which Jesus created and set vibrating for all time, we begin to see that Christ, God incarnate, is in creation for sure, but most especially in what seems to be one of the hardest places for humans to fathom, in other human beings. In the Bible, we can hear this recorded in the recollection of Jesus as providing an Easter onward presence in the love and comfort and compassion as the unrecognized gardener, the traveler on the road to Emmaus, along with some other Bible stories. Jesus has been and continues to be experienced mystically, but also in the everyday, in the every man, in the every woman, in the every child. Jesus himself taught that we can find Christ in the poor and the thirsty and the sick and the stranger and the prisoner. His point was that when we tend to the least among us, we tend to Christ. Others are a very real, very available means of accessing the risen Christ. The ultimate bottom line to the story is an undeniable truth that Jesus lives on for us. He opened this floodgate of love. He amplified God's unstoppable way, the cosmic force that unceasingly calls for humankind to love. Jesus heard that call so loud and so strong that he dedicated his entire being to it. He emptied himself of quest for other things and pursued love with all the gifts and opportunities and moments that God provided. Imagined a world where all hurdles put up to love were knocked down, and then he lived as if they were knocked down. He was and is the first great teacher and practitioner of equality, and his reward, our reward for that life well lived, is the resurrection. Easter remembers. It remembers the hope and the promise that love cannot die, will not die, and vibrantly lives on and on and on and on. Easter is a celebration of that. And Christianity is supposed to be a day-to-day effort by Jesus' followers to live into that promise and become a part of the hope as we try to empty ourselves of quests for other things and turn toward pursuit of love with all the gifts and opportunities and moments that God provides to us. And Christianity is also about celebrating the presence of God's incarnation in everything, from the lowly among us, to each other, to Christ in all of creation. And one of the beautiful things about stepping into the field of force, of finding the Christian portal of God, is that we can find God in ourselves, in one another, in just being, and in all of creation. Once in that field of force, All you have to do is take a look, open your eyes, and miraculously, wonderfully, Jesus will show it to you. Because Christ is risen. Risen indeed.